Good day, everyone. So glad that you're with me. I have it. If you've been with me before, you can see that I have a different background today. I am not in my office in Indianapolis, that we call Remarkable House, but rather I'm about 2 miles from my kidhood home, the farm that I own in Michigan, at a friend's location that has good broadband. So I'm glad that you're here. Wherever you are, I'd love to know where you are. Actually, you now know that I'm in Michigan at the moment. You can say hello. Click the comments wherever you happen to be and just tell us where you're from, and I'd be glad to hear that and know who all is with us today. I'll say this morning for me, just barely, but I don't know what time of the day it is for you. Let us know where you are. I'd love to have you do that, because you play an important part in what's about to happen, because you're here, and my guest will be joining us in a second. You have the chance to have an impact on this conversation, because I want you to imagine that you're here with us. You are virtually. And so if you have questions or comments, just like if we were all at the table together, you would ask them, right? So ask them here. If you got comments or questions or ideas, share them. They will make for a better conversation, make it more relevant. And I hope that you will do exactly that. Eventually, when you do that, not only will this be a better experience for us today, but it will make for a better podcast episode. You see up over my shoulder that says the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. This will eventually become an episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. In fact, what people will hear there on the podcast is about to start, because I'm going to do a countdown and then we'll kick that off. And so continue to put in your comments. I'll be looking at those in a sec after we do this intro. And Marissa, this is for you. And we'll go in 3, 2, 1. Work. It is part of your life and probably why you're listening to this podcast instead of picking a different podcast right now. And work is hard, but does it have to be so hard? I mean, can we transform our work so it is less sucky and more successful? Well, our guest today thinks so, and that's what we're going to talk about on today's episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could be live with us on future episodes on your favorite social channel. You can get information about those future episodes and therefore join us and interact with us like people will be doing today. You can do that by joining our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Take your pick. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn more and join those groups so you can get access to future live episodes and get this information earlier. Today's episode is brought to you by our new book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more and get an excerpt for free at longdistanceteambook.com. I hope you'll do that. And then I hope that you will stay right here. I'm going to bring in our guest as promised. Here she is. Melissa Swift has joined us. Let me introduce her, and then we will dive in. Melissa Swift leads the Transformation Solutions group at Mercer, U.S. and Canada. She is responsible for the firm's efforts in workplace transformation, HR transformation, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and workforce analytics. All that's brought together in the work that she does today. Throughout her career, she has pioneered techniques to reshape organizations for digital and workplace transformation, leading breakthrough projects across industries ranging from manufacturing to professional services to biotech and more. She's a recognized thought leader on the subject of the future of work. One of the reasons I'm excited that she's with us today. She has been quoted on the subject in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and many more. And today she's here in part because she's the author of a brand new book, Work Here Now. Think like a human and build a powerhouse workplace. She has a BA from Harvard and an MBA from Columbia, and she is our guest today. Melissa, thank you for being here. So glad to have you.
Thank you. I am excited to be here and really, really pumped for this conversation.
And now I can see, let's see, we've got people in Jacksonville and Boulder and 6 p.m. in South Africa and Abu Dhabi and Detroit. And I have been to both of those places, as well as Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I have not been. But anyway, we are glad that all of you are here. And Melissa, thanks so much for being here. As I said a second ago, let's start here. You didn't wake up when you were your daughter's age, at age 8. You did not wake up and say, I think What I want to do is be a future of work expert. I doubt if that was the thing. So like sort of what led you to doing this kind of work? Let's start there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think the red thread of my career, the thing that's been, because I've had a bit of the jungle gym career, not the career ladder, not strictly linear. The red thread has been that I believe that you can sort of do better for the world and make money doing it. I think those objectives are entirely consistent. So every job I've done has had an element of that. But how I landed here exactly in the future of work space is that looking at all of those ways we kind of make the world work better, but we also make money doing it. It really started to occur to me that the thing we've got to re-engineer is how people operate within organizations. And I had a bit of an epiphany during COVID specifically about—
You're the only one, by the way,
right,
that
just me.
an epiphany
Just me.
during COVID. But go,
Right.
Go ahead.
Not like anybody like changed jobs or anything or did anything weird like that, right? Because I've been thinking about this book for a while, and it started off in my head as this kind of jokey, silly, look at us, we're so silly, we do sprints, we work in open plan offices. It was going to be kind of a goofy book. And during COVID, I was kind of like, whoa, oh my goodness, all these ways that we work wrong, this is a really serious problem. And it's a systemic problem. And that we want to, we look at individuals, we want to help individuals, but there's also some things we have to do on that systemic side so that the work we do with individuals can be successful, right? The old clean fish, dirty ponds issue. So I got really obsessed with those dirty ponds, and here we are today.
So what's the big idea that you want us to talk about today?
Well, I would say, I think the big idea is that work is broken. Very fundamentally.
I use sucky in the introduction because you say somewhere that works.
I do use the verb.
We will get there, but go ahead.
Absolutely.
Work is broken. Keep going.
Absolutely. And fundamentally, we have this belief, we go to work, we do all these activities, and we believe the activities are the right ones, and we're basically doing them the right way. These are our ingoing assumptions in every workday. I would like to challenge that. The activities really might not match the outcomes that we're going for, either in our role or for the organization overall. And the way we're doing them, gosh, it might be completely blinkered. When we think about the Industrial Revolution, we look at how people worked in factories back then. We're like, oh God, that is awful, absolutely awful. You had people getting limbs chopped off in machines, and we say, that's terrible. Like, that's bad work, right? But we have to use that same lens today and say, maybe we're doing the psychological equivalent of that to people right here and now in 2023.
So I'm curious, because for those of you that are here live, we have people, we've just seen it from around the world, from Sao Paulo to Abu Dhabi to South Africa, etc. And even, I don't know, Detroit, right? So, but my question is, for all of you that are here, like, especially for those of you not in the U.S., because Melissa and I happen to be in the U.S. as we're having this conversation, like, are you feeling that same thing? So I talk with leaders around the world. I kind of know the answer, but I would really love to just hear from those of you who are watching live, like, did that resonate? What you just heard from Melissa, did that resonate for you wherever you might be? And that would be a useful way for you all to participate in this moment. So the big idea is work is broken, and we actually probably could make it better. And we'll get to that in a second. But I feel compelled to ask a question like this when you are a future of work expert. In what ways has work changed the most in the context of how you think it had, and how it will have an impact in the future? So what I put on the screen there is pretty long, but how has work changed the most that's going to make the biggest difference moving forward?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of a few trends that I would point to, and we'll start with a negative one. Work has definitely intensified over, let's say, the last 40 to 50 years. And this is something that fascinated me as I started researching for the book, because academic researchers kind of know this, but we don't know this in professional practice. We don't talk about it. And work intensification is simply cramming too many units of work into one unit of time. So it might be I'm on too many Zoom calls. It might be I have to pick too many strawberries in an hour. Every job has a version of this. You've probably seen the discourse around, do companies need two CEOs? Because the work of being CEO, right, is now, it's too much, right? So that too muchness, if we don't get it in check, I think that's going to have a really unpleasant impact. One trend that I think is interesting and that could cut both ways is actually increased transparency. So the most live transparency discussion right now is around pay transparency. If I know what everybody in the organization makes, how does that impact me? How does that impact the organization? Does it get us to a fairer world, or does it get us to a world where everybody's worried about their pay all the time? But actually, transparency in general is a really interesting one shifting the world of work. If you think about it, with technology, the information doesn't have to be captured in my head. It can all sit in a system. And so if the way that Kevin, if you're my boss, right, you manage me, I've got more information than you. Well, what happens in a workplace where Kevin and Melissa have exactly the same information, right? Because technology surfaces us the same things, right? How does that change that management or leadership dynamic? So I think that one's kind of a little under the radar, but can have really profound impacts.
Well, I think to this point, most of the conversation about transparency is leaders, you need to be more transparent, but you're talking about it more broadly than that. And I think that's a healthy thing for us to talk about. But what else? Give us one or two other things that you think are here now that are going to matter most in the future.
Yeah, I think asynchronous work is a big one. So if we don't have to be in meetings all day, working at exactly the same time. And by the way, there's a blue collar equivalent of this too, right? It's not just about you and I sitting on Zoom calls. It's about, do workers on a manufacturing shift have to actually, sit on the assembly line or whatever at the same time? The more that we can work at different times, that really creates greater flexibility and a more inclusive workforce. But it's not all positive. No. Thinking about the work that you do, right? In leadership development, if people aren't working at the same time and they can't role model off of the leaders around them, right? That creates developmental challenges. And it's also hard for people either new to an organization or new to the workforce. Because again, they're not getting that I'm watching you work moment.
Yep. We lose serendipity. We lose a whole bunch of sorts of things. So now I promised I'd ask this question. So why is it that you say that work is broken, or specifically why, other than this intensification piece that we talked about, why do you say that work sucks?
Well, I would say, number one, we've hit a productivity wall. Think about so much technology. Think about what has changed. I mean, ChatGPT, right? The pace of technological change in our lifetime. But productivity, as measured by different federal governments, right, kind of keeps inching up, a little bit, right? Technology is zooming, and business is kind of going like this. So what gives, right? What's going on? What is that invisible drag? And I think that invisible drag is work sucking. The other piece is some of the health outcomes. There's great data I cited in the book from the UN and the World Health Organization that, work is directly or indirectly, it kills a lot of people every year.
It's not as obvious as the severed limb, right?
Right.
Or the severed finger, or something like that, right? But it's real. Yeah,
it's very real. It's very real. And I think part of what happened during COVID was it just became more vivid, that we could really feel some of that kind of mental overhang of broken work starting to just palpably affect us. And again, that ties to kind of this point about making money and doing the right thing are not inconsistent. Because if we could fix work, people would feel better. You would have better health outcomes, but also productivity wouldn't go like this. It would go like this in pace with what we're able to do technologically.
The interesting thing about the mental health stuff that you were just talking about is I think that's one of the things that we got from the pandemic that I hope we don't lose, which is that we raised the level of conversation about that. And we've certainly, and I'm not talking about societally, although that's certainly true, but I think that leaders as a general statement, not every leader, but leaders as a general statement got better at being empathetic and realized that those conversations about something beyond work and weather mattered. And I hope that we don't forget what we learned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do hope there's a possibility for kind of a step change to your point behaviorally, that sometimes you have to kind of, hit rock bottom to come back up. And my hope is, during COVID, to your point, we kind of hit rock bottom and people said, all right, well, if I don't start behaving differently as a leader, right, it's not going to work. We had to hit that it's not going to work moment.
Right. So one of the things that I think I will always remember about your book, and we talked a little bit before I hit the live button about what you had originally thought you were going to write about, and that sort of thing. But you have some things, some phrases that you use in the book that I think will probably become the calling cards of the book in many ways. So you say that we have a work anxiety monster and a boss baby customer.
Yes.
So I'll put those on the screen if you're watching so you can remember those. But I want you to tell me, like, why have you sort of come up with these two personas, if you will, and then what are they?
Yeah, so it's interesting. In terms of the work anxiety monster, what I thought was important was to capture what we are doing to ourselves in many ways, right? That we kind of look at broken work and we're like, oh, it's broken. But okay, what's the psychology behind that? What's actually going on in our own head? So I envision this work anxiety monster as it's this little voice in your head going, oh, people are lazy and people are slow and let's make them work harder and make them work faster. And by the way, we do it to ourselves in spades, right? We tell, oh, Melissa, you didn't get enough done this morning. You stink, right? We do it to ourselves. But then we also do it to others and we do it to organizations. And we design all of these, again, kind of counterproductive things to sort of, say, okay, work faster, work harder. And shocker, it's not impactful. It doesn't actually drive the outcomes that we're going for. Right. But I thought it was important to kind of create, it is a monster, and to help people understand exactly what is the train of bad logic that's leading them to those kind of weird decisions. With the boss baby customer, I think that's an interesting
one. Before you go though, I want.
Sorry.
Do you think it's? I mean, we listen, we create and listen to the monster internally. Perhaps we're hearing that from our boss, and or our organization, and then there's there's some sort of societal piece to that. Which is the one that's the biggest problem? Do you think?
I think it's actually how it manifests within organizations. Because if you think about it, when we do it to ourselves, or even our boss does it, or when society does it, there's a conversation about it, or you can have a conversation about it. You can say, oh God, why did I just give myself all that negative self-talk? That wasn't good. Or you can say to your boss, okay, you want us to do this faster. Let's talk about why, right? Do people always feel empowered to push back? No, not always. But there's work that can be done there. Where it's really insidious is where it gets baked into the fabric of organizations. So everything from your processes to your org design, right?
Give us an example of what that looks like, because now we're talking about culture, and I thought we'll probably end up there before we're done. Like how does the monster manifest itself in the culture or the fabric of the organization? Give us an example.
Right. So as a for instance, let's say an organization decides that the best way to get their salespeople to work faster and harder is transparency every single day about how much each person has sold. So think about the dynamic that creates. That, okay, I can see, oh, I'm number 2 now and I'm number 7 now. And any good data scientist will tell you real-time data is not always the most helpful. Let's think about it. I'm working on some big deal for 6 months. So I'm sitting at the bottom of the list at 0, and then I rocket to the top, and you get these cycles of like, you're an idiot, you're a genius, you're an idiot, you're a genius, right? And the psychology around that isn't really helpful for anybody. But it's a seemingly neutral process that the work anxiety monster has told us to set up, right? That, people won't work fast enough and they won't work hard enough unless they know exactly where they stand every day, even if it's garbage data, it's messing people up psychologically, right?
It's the wrong measurement.
Right, exactly.
Of course, we do have organizations that aren't measuring anything, which is a whole other issue. But that's, at least in terms of individual performance. But now, okay, so now boss, baby, customer.
So
Really?
this one is interesting, right? Because the work anxiety monster, right? That's like a nasty little monster. The boss baby customer comes out of really good intentions, really good intentions. The boss baby customer came out of, and I tend to trace this back, and maybe it's just my own personal career journey kind of coming into the workplace at that point. I trace this back to the .com era, where we got all into, with the we got the internet. We're going to over deliver all the time. And it's 2-day shipping. It's 1-day shipping. It's 2-hour shipping. It's 15-minute delivery, right? We can do everything for you all the time. And what we did was we created a boss baby customer. The customer is your boss. They direct your every action, but they're also a baby. They can't do anything for themselves, right? They are helpless and totally in charge of you. And that dynamic, what happens when customer centricity basically over rotates into really compromising your employee experience, that's what's led us to kind of a toxic place in many organizations. And the irony of this one is both that it's well-intentioned, but also that it doesn't lead us to the best possible customer service. That a lot of times what it leads to is messed up processes, stressed out employees, right? And then they don't actually deliver well for the customer. So it's a world where nobody is happy. And that's kind of what's sad about it.
Right. Even though good intentions at the start, I mean, it's a really good example of unintended consequences is what it is. You got one other phrase that I think is something that will be a hallmark when people read the book that they will remember. And I think I know where this harkens to, but you talk about breaking the workforce copy machine. What in the heck are you talking about?
Yeah, so this was actually became sort of an obsession of mine because for a long time I was kind of irritated by the phrase future of work. And I was like, well, it's great, but we never get there. Why don't we get there? And part of what I realized is we've got this copy machine that keeps us doing the same things over and over, even as we try to change. So there's a few different levers you can hit. I think one big one is talent acquisition. I worked at one point with a consumer goods company who had this mantra about no more replicants. If we already employ this person, don't hire them again. Don't hire a copy of them. And I loved that. But what's interesting is most talent acquisition processes are set up to hire the same people over and over and the same kinds of people over and over. And you get these funny, stories like, oh, this bank only hires lacrosse players and things like that. And you're like, oh, ha, ha, ha. But the very mechanics, so let's say you go to open a new position that you're going to hire for many organizations. They're going to say, okay, well, what requisition are you going to clone? Think about the verb in that sentence, right? You're literally, technology is telling you copy paste.
Right.
And so that's one of those levers that keeps you that's the copy machine. You're going to keep spitting out the past over and over until you fundamentally re-engineer talent acquisition. So you're not cloning recs and hiring the same people over and over.
So that harkens me to, you mentioned Chat GPT. So let me just talk about it for a second, right? So that harkens to that, like that's a tremendously useful tool. Cloning that rec as a starting point is a tremendously useful tool. So you're not starting with a blank sheet of paper, but we have to train ourselves or set the expectation that that's your starting point. That's not go ask for that go find that person, right? Like there's value in that, right? And so it's the same thing with ChatGPT. You do something there, I'm not going to cut and paste that, but you're going to use that potentially to help you in writing or for brainstorming something. And so it's using it to help you get away from a blank sheet of paper. And the same thing can be true there, right? And the other thing that strikes me as we're sitting here today, I wrote something about this morning that'll come out tomorrow about I know what kind of movies we're going to have now because the new Super Mario Brothers movie was so successful its first weekend. We're going to have, there have already been mergers of movies and video games, but there are going to be a whole bunch more of them now because it's safe, right? We got to have one of those, right?
Yeah,
because for them, we got to have one of those. So we have to be really careful, I think, with all that. And I love the idea of calling it the workforce copy machine, because there's value in best practice. There's lots of value in what we already know, but we have to be careful to pause in that to make sure that we're not, as you used this phrase earlier, over rotating, right? And turning it into just hit the copy button alone, right?
Absolutely. And a big part of it, by the way, is what we reward people for. So, think about how leaders are rewarded in most organizations, especially, large public companies. You're not rewarded for transformational change. You are often rewarded for consistency and sameness and not upsetting the apple cart, right? The literal mechanics of what people get paid for are kind of designed to kind of copy paste the past right into the future.
We've got a lot of organizations, and as you and I are having this conversation, I'm going to date stamp this on the podcast, which will live forever, presumably. As we're sitting here having this conversation in April of 2023, we've got a lot of organizations that have tried to use the workforce copy machine to take us back to the culture and the workplace that we had prior to the pandemic. Talk to me about that. And I mean, I think the psychology is pretty clear as to why it happens, or why are people who are wanting, I keep hitting that copy button or trying to hit that copy button. But what are your thoughts or your takes on how we get past that? How do we actually do this break as it relates to sort of when, where, and how people are working?
Yeah. So one of the practical strategies I offer in the book is don't assume your personal career trajectory would work for anybody today. And that sounds so simple and basic, but it comes out of a lot of C-suite conversations, particularly at the beginning of COVID, where there was all this anxiety about if we let people work remotely, right, they won't get to do the things that I did, right? I would physically hang around my boss's office, right? That stuff that, that everything that worked for me, the junior folks in my organization won't get access to. And like anything else, there's some truth there, right? You still have, to your point about serendipity, right? You still have to create those interactions. You still have to create that serendipity. But saying my exact career that got me here, I need to replicate that experience for somebody in a very different world. If you can kind of break that link in your mind as a leader, that's a really, really helpful, this book is about starting places. It's a really helpful starting place.
It's so true because, I mean, there are a lot of people that and the media and people who cast a lot of stones at CEOs, especially mid-pandemics, if we're bringing everybody back. The psychology is like, why wouldn't they? It worked for them. They want their people to be successful. They know it's a proven strategy, but it was a proven strategy then. It isn't necessarily. I mean, the world has changed. And one of the best things about the pandemic, and there are many good things about it, lots not so good for sure, is that it gives us a very clear picture that we can operate in a new world. And we have to say, how do we have to look at what we learned in this. And you can't ignore it. To go back, to hit the copy machine button, to go back to now we'd have to go to 2019.
2019, yeah. Ooh.
Right? Because now we're in April. So we were in lockdown 3 years ago now. So to go back 3 years and 2 months ago is to say that, well, we didn't learn anything that could possibly be useful to us over these 3 years, which is silly. That's just silly, right? It's just silly. So you've mentioned it a couple of times that the book is meant to be very practical. It is. Everybody, there are 90, count them, 90 strategies. And so we're going to start our 4-hour session as we dive through each of the 90
in detail.
as we're going to go into detail, and I'm going to do it out of order so we can find out how well she remembers the stuff that she wrote months ago. And I'm just teasing. So, but there are 90 of them, and there's some really, really great stuff. And a couple of them have come up and you've stated them. But I'm curious, is there one just in this conversation that you think maybe applies to what we've talked about or connects to something we've said that you would like to share it with people, not only to be helpful for them, but to give them a sense of what they get in the book?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's one strategy that I think underlies a lot of this change in a really positive way. And it's I felt so compelled by it. It's actually in there twice. So technically there are 89 strategies, and this one repeats because it's so important.
That is correct.
And it's about just doing less. And when you think about that, anxiety monster is pushing you on activity, right? It's telling you to do more, do more, do more, do more, do more. But actually pulling back, doing less, doing it better, and restructuring your organization to do less and do it better, I think that's at the root of so many of the positive changes I'm seeing within organizations right now. I mean, I'll give a not funny, but not so funny story where I was sitting with the C-suite of a tech company, and one of the leaders started berating the CEO about, we have, what is this? We have 37 priorities. And I was like, oh, ha, ha, ha. They have 37 priorities. No, they had 37 priorities.
Which means they had zero.
Which means they had zero. Absolutely. And when you think about so much of what I talk about in the book, be it intensified work, greedy work, work getting muddled and misunderstood, and you're having the wrong people do it, do fewer things. And a lot of that begins to solve itself. It's like pruning back a garden and making it truly beautiful.
When I was first reading in the book about the work intensification piece, and it's actually, I wrote it down here in my notes as you were chatting earlier, and it certainly relates to doing less. It's like, have a not to do list. Like, what are we not going to do? Like, we all have a to do list, but what are we not going to do? What are we going to choose not to do organizationally? What are we going to choose to do individually as leaders, which many of you who are listening are? And but as leaders, you're also wearing the individual contributor hat too, right? You're wearing both hats. So like, what are we going to choose to not do? Because we all know that some of that we prune away is never going to be missed, and it's actually going to make things better after you prune, right? So I think it's incredibly valuable. So I have one that's not sort of at the center of the book, but again, to give people a flavor. So I just want you to quickly tell us about this one. You tell us that one of our strategies should be to quiet our suck it up voice.
Yeah.
So what do you mean, and why should we do it?
Yeah. So if you think about it, as a leader, people are going to come to you with all sorts of complaints, questions, concerns, and you can be the most empathic person in the world. And sometimes you will hear, again, this little voice in your head going, can they just suck it up? Seriously, can they just push through? Why am I being whined to about this? Blah, 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 blah. And to the extent that you can really quiet that voice down in your own head and treat
and take it off of your face too, by the way, everybody.
Right. But treat what they're bringing you as that's data. And forget the individual for a second, you as the leader for a second. It's data about how work is getting done wrong in your purview. Yeah. And you want to hear that data and do something with it. And when you think about it in that way, it's a lot more neutral than, oh my God, so-and-so is whining again. It gives it a different flavor. So shutting down that suck it up voice and being a bit more just quiet and reflective about somebody's bringing me important information. I'm going to use it.
Yeah, I think that's so good. And that's one of the reasons I picked it. So first time ever in the life of this podcast that the word suck has been used. Oh, that's now makes 4 times, I think. So anyway, that's probably, that is, I'm sure, a record. So I want to shift now, Melissa, before we finish, and shift out of this important work that you do, and I appreciate that you've invested some of your time to be with us today. What is it that you do for fun?
Let's see. So I go running every morning. Although any runner will tell you for fun is like kind of questionable there, the way you feel after you run, right? That's the fun part. Love to travel with my family and just explore different parts of the world on foot. I'm one of those people that loves to kind of, experience things by walking around, right? And just being immersed. And I'm also a foodie, right? So I love to experience, the world through food. So yeah, I'd say that's a quick summary of for fun, and a voracious reader as well.
Which is where I'm going next. The only thing you knew I was going to ask you, which is what are you reading right now, or these days, or lately? Like, what are you going to share with us?
Yeah, so I'm actually reading a great book called The Confidence Game by Maria Konnikova. And what she did was kind of scientifically break down how con artists work. And for me, this is incredibly relevant to the work that I do, because one of the big red threads of the book and of my work in general is kind of figuring out what at work is real and what's not. And so the rigor that she applies to sort of picking apart what's real and what's a scam, and how a scam works and how you know it's a scam, it has great applicability for just how do we test what in the workplace is real and not. So I'm learning a lot from it.
The confidence game, everybody. We'll have that in the show notes. We'll also have in the show notes Melissa's new book, Work Here Now. Excuse me, Melissa. Where can we learn more about you and the book? Where do you want to connect people to connect with you? Here's a chance to tell us that.
All right. So you can buy the book wherever books are sold, be it Amazon or independent booksellers online or any of that good stuff. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I'm also active on Twitter as well. So please, come find me. As I was telling you before the show, one of the best parts about writing a book is people come and talk to you about the book. And that's the coolest. So come engage.
There you go. You can add to Melissa's coolness factor and how she feels by connecting with her on LinkedIn. I can tell you I've done it. And so join us and join Melissa. Hope you do that. So before we finish, everybody, I'm going to ask you the question that I ask you every single episode. And it's not a question for Melissa or any other guest. It's a question for you. Yeah, I'm talking to you. The question is, what are you going to do with what we just talked about? Like, now what? What are you going to do? Right? It's not like, okay, this one's over. I'm going to get off my Peloton now. And it's fine if you've been listening to this while you're on your Peloton or while you're on your run or when you're doing whatever. But if all you do is take it in and move on, there's nothing of real value that's happened. To be like us going through the pandemic and not taking anything from the 3 years of learning. So what are you going to take from this? And maybe it's, I need to create that not to-do list, or I need to think about doing less. Maybe it is, I need to think about the work anxiety monster and how am I promulgating it for myself or in our organization? Maybe you need to think about what's going on in our culture that's creating work that sucks, like whatever it is. But the action that you take is what will make this of worth. And I hope that you will do whatever that is. So before we finish, any final thoughts, Melissa? Anything else that you want to say before we go?
No, I mean, I think that was almost the perfect outro, right? Because that's what I want people to do is read this book and go do something, anything, try it. It's perfection.
You got 89 ways, everybody. So go get started. Listen, thank you, Melissa, for being here. It was a pleasure to have you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation, and it did not disappoint. And for all the rest of you, we do this every week. And there's lots of really, really smart, wise, interesting people that I have the pleasure of joining me, and I hope that you'll join me again. So we do that again every week. Hope you'll come back. I hope that you will share this with someone else, that if you like that you share it in your organization. I hope that you will subscribe or like or whatever you do on whatever platform that you're on. You know what I'm talking about. And of course, a review is also fantastic. But however or whenever, you can always rest assured and know that we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.